At one point, she had a 5 million franc bounty on her head. She once killed an SS guard with her bare hands. A colleague once described her as the most feminine woman I know, until the fighting starts. Who was the White Mouse, one of the most decorated women to serve in World War II, and one of the Gestapo's most wanted? Nancy Wake is born in 1912 in New Zealand and moved to Australia a few years later. Growing up in poverty, she's always restless and has an adventurous streak, and at age 16, after inheriting £200, a large sum of money at the time, she left home. After traveling to New York and London, she settles in Paris, where she picks up work as a freelance journalist. In the 1930s, she spends some time in Vienna. While there, she witnesses the horrid treatment of Jews under the growing pro-Nazi movement and develops an intense hatred for the ideology well before war even breaks out. In 1936, she marries French industrialist Henri Fiocca and settles in Marseille, becoming heavily involved in the wealthy social circles and is an active part of Marseille nightlife. When Germany invades France in 1940, Wake is not one to sit idly by, stating, "I don't see why we women should just wave our men a proud goodbye and then knit them balaclavas." She spends some time as an ambulance driver, but this comes to an end when France is overrun. After a mere 6 weeks, official resistance collapses and France is occupied by the Germans. Unofficial resistance, however, is another story entirely. In France, like most of the other nations conquered by the Germans, networks of underground resistance movements spring up. Their task is to spy on, assassinate, sabotage, and generally be a thorn in the side of the occupiers. Joining the burgeoning resistance movement, Wake becomes involved in what is known as the Pat O'Leary Line, an underground escape network for persecuted French citizens, Allied soldiers, and downed Allied air crews who were trapped in the country. It was named after the pseudonym of the leader, Albert Guerrilla. After the war, it's estimated that over 7,000 personnel escaped to freedom through the Pat O'Leary Line or similar routes. Wake and her husband sheltered soldiers and airmen in their apartment and act as couriers, relaying messages, supplies, and money to the different groups along the network. Their wealth and influence enable them to establish valuable connections and travel much more freely throughout the country, giving them the opportunity to coordinate with and connect many resistance groups. It was at this time that Wake begins to show up on the Gestapo's radar, and she earns the nickname the White Mouse for her ability to escape from their clutches time and time again. Even with a 5 million franc bounty on her head, Wake remains elusive and manages to avoid capture, much to the annoyance of her German pursuers. Her luck would run out, however, and she would eventually be cornered and apprehended by the Gestapo. Wake then spends 4 days being interrogated, but never cracks. She refuses to reveal the full scale of her operations, or importantly, her true identity. In a daring effort, she's released when Pat O'Leary barged into the jail posing as a member of the Vichy French militia, stating that Wake was his mistress and demanding a release. The confused and no doubt embarrassed German jailers complied, obliviously freeing the most hunted woman in all of France. Despite her crafty nature, the noose continued to tighten on Wake, and the Germans would be hot on her heels again in 1943. When the Pat O'Leary Line is betrayed and many of its operatives compromised, she is forced to flee the country, leaving her husband behind. Henri Fiocca would be captured and tortured by the Gestapo to reveal his wife's location, but he refuses to betray her, leading to his eventual execution. Wake would only find out about his death after France was liberated in 1944. Making her escape through Spain, Wake eventually reaches the safety of Britain. Once there, she tries to join the Special Operations Executive, a branch of British intelligence that sent agents to occupied Europe for espionage and sabotage, and to coordinate the efforts of the numerous resistance groups. During her training with the SOE, she is described as being a good and fast shot, and gains a reputation for being enthusiastic, determined, and generally capable with, as the report states, abundant energy. She's also reported to have a bit of a rebellious streak, with one document stating that she has a, quote, lack of proper seriousness and responsibility, end quote. She drives this point home by arriving for a training session drunk. In addition to firearms, she receives training in grenades, explosives, unarmed combat, as well as radio codes, signals, and night parachuting. It's now spring 1944. Everyone knows that the Allied invasion of France is imminent. The only question is where and when it will take place. In accordance with the Allied plan, the job of the French resistance is simple: cause as much confusion and chaos as possible. The hope being that when the landings happen, the Germans will be in utter disarray, allowing liberation to proceed more smoothly. In April, Nancy Wake and 2 other SOE operatives form a freelance team and are sent to France to help the local resistance coordinate their activities. Parachuting into the province of Auvergne in southern France, she becomes entangled in a tree and is left suspended over the ground. Luckily for her, she's spotted by the local resistance leader before the Germans find her. The resistance leader, Henri Tardeva, remarks, "I hope that all the trees in France bear such beautiful fruit this year." Wake, with her typical politeness, replies, "Cut out that bullshit and get me out of this tree." Now safely on the ground, Wake and the rest of her team set up shop, using wireless radios to organize supply drops, stashing away the supplies at hidden caches. They also conduct various missions of sabotage and espionage in preparation for the fast-approaching Normandy landings. It's now early June, and Wake, other SOE operatives, and French resistance fighters participate in a massive raid against the Germans. Some 7,000 fighters strike in a coordinated attack against German positions, aiming to deal as much damage as possible. The Germans respond with overwhelming force, using tanks, artillery, and air power to crush the incursion. Wake is right in the middle of the fighting, and is forced to withdraw, scattering to avoid detection. At this point, another disaster strikes. In the confusion, the radio operator of her freelance team is forced to destroy the radio and the code books to avoid them falling into German hands. Without a radio, there is no way to contact London. No contact, no supply drops, no coordination. Of course, Nancy Wake is not someone to sit idle when something needs to be done, so she finds a bicycle and makes her way from her hideout in Saint-Santin to the nearest available SOE radio, located in Châteauroux. Dodging German patrols, she informs London of the situation, gets new codes, and then pedals back. A journey of about 500 kilometers, or about 310 miles, in 72 hours. She, the rest of the SOE, and the French resistance spend the next few months wrecking communication lines, destroying bridges, and making life as difficult as they can for the German Rear Command, as the Western Allies liberate France. Wake also leads an attack on a local Gestapo headquarters, which results in 38 German dead and the destruction of the HQ. It's during this raid that Wake kills a German with her bare hands to prevent him from sounding the alarm. Wake continues to help expel remaining Germans from France until September 1944, when her clandestine activities come to an end. After the war, she's highly decorated for her accomplishments. Among many other awards, she receives the French Médaille de la Résistance and the Croix de Guerre, the George Medal from Great Britain, and the American Medal of Freedom. She would remarry an RAF officer in 1957, moving back to London, where she lived until her death in 2011 at the age of 98. When asked if she ever felt any fear during her time in the field, Wake would simply state, "I was never afraid. I was too busy to be afraid."